I'm going to tell y'all something that, and it's going to sound a little bit strange, and people not going to really like believe what I'm saying, or it might sound kind of off, but when fighters, people that fight are really good-hearted people. Now listen to me. The people that fight, that's the way they express that, that's their defense mechanism. And it's probably because they never had people to protect them. So they had to fight. Now, I'm not talking about them people that, you know, when y'all go on to fight and they constantly saying, yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm going to not. Don't take them people with no fight to no fight with you, because they're going to get beat up. And then it's going to look like both of y'all got beat up. That's not a fighter. That's somebody that just out there and hoping to God that their mouth get them out of the fight. You know, that's not a fighter. First of all, people that fight actually think. They think through their fights. You know, they don't just sit up there and just be wild and hitting and doing all that. That's how even boxers do. They're trained fighters. They're trained to think. They're trained to see how they can, you know, immobilize their opponent. And the reason why I'm talking about this, because I know fighters get like a bad rep and people don't want to talk to them, don't want to be their friend, and can't trust them. But a fighter is really a good-hearted person. And a good-hearted person usually is a person that got taken advantage of a lot. And with that being said, I am going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a true story. A true story that happened to a little girl named Tyshawn. And I've been wanting to tell this story, and I hope that when I tell this story that it help a lot of people. You know, this is not to hurt anyone, but this is my story. This is the things that happened to me. And these are the things that I encountered when I was a little girl. And that's the reason why, you know, a lot of people, you know, would stay away from me and said that I was bad and that I always fought and this and that. But they never knew the real story. They never knew how much I suffered. They never knew who really Tyshawn was, and, you know, and what happened to Tyshawn. So I am going to first, you know, thank you all for listening. And, you know, and I thank God for even giving me the strength to even say the things that happened to me without being embarrassed or, you know, or looked down on and everything like that, you know, and, you know, just giving me the strength to do this. And one day when I was 5 years old, I was on the street. We lived on the street called Archdale with my mama. And my mama and her friends and her friends were in her room using drugs. And it used to scare me so much that I went downstairs, and we had a den. So I went downstairs in the den, and I was watching TV. And as I was watching TV, one of her friends, because I went downstairs because I didn't want the men to come in my room, you know, and try to get me out of my room. So I figured that I would be safe downstairs. So I went downstairs and I was in the den. And when I went in the den, one of the men came outside, went all the way out the door, the front door. But in the front of the house, there was a window to the den. And the guy, he told me, he said, "Come here." And I looked, and I just stared, because I'm 5 years old at this time. And he reached his hand in there and grabbed me and pulled me through the window. And when he pulled me out through the window, he took me in the back of the house where we had a shed. like a tool shed. And, you know, I was standing there and I was so scared, but I was just stuck scared. I was so stuck. I was so scared. And I remember it like it happened to me a few minutes ago. I remember everything that I had on. I had on some red pants and a red and white turtleneck shirt, long sleeve shirt. And he said, lay down. And I was so terrified. I didn't know what to do. And he laid me down. He laid me down and he pulled down my pants. And that's when he climbed on top of me. And I was hurting so bad. You know, I was really hurting bad. And I remember I kept saying, you know, like after a while, when he was done, and mind you, I'm 5 years old, so I don't know like what's going on. So when he got up, and I was like, what is that white stuff coming out of him? I didn't know what was going on. So he put my clothes back on, and he pushed me like out to go to the back door of my house. Now, this is it's really dark. So I want to say it's about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. He left and went the other way, and I went through the back door. And my mama was in the kitchen, and she was standing there, and she looked at me. And I looked at her, and she said, where you been? And I said, in the shed. And she looked down, kind of looking a little sad. And then she said, sit down so I can fix you something to eat. And, you know, no questions, no, why were you out there? And in the shed, none of that. You know, it's 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, you're supposed to be in the house, in the bed, sleep like my brothers was. But that never happened. So that right there, I didn't have any protection. I didn't have any protection. So after that day, my mother would, every time she would have company, I would go into my brother's room. And one day she had company again, and I went into my brother's room, and I kept getting in my brother's bed and getting behind him. And she would come and get me and tell me to come back in my bedroom. But I was scared. So every time she would leave this particular day, I would go back in there, and she would come back in there and she would get me. So I'm like, you know, this is pathetic. So the last time she came and got me, she told me, if you go back and get into your brother's bed again, I'm going to whoop you. So I went back in there and laid on the dresser, you know, because she said the bed. So I laid on the dresser. So she got mad, and I got in trouble or whatever. But I didn't want those men to keep harming me. You know, I don't care what deal y'all had going on, you know, but a child should always be safe in the home. A child should forever be safe in her home. It shouldn't be like that. And at the hands of my mother, that really hurt. So that's what my first defense mechanism came in as. It came in because I didn't have the protection that I needed. So I felt that I needed to protect myself. You know, at that time I was young. I didn't know who God was. But looking back on it, you know, I know that I couldn't defend myself against these men, but I was old enough to recognize who it was that did it to me. I was able to describe him. I've seen him more than one time. So normally when people, when they know that you can recognize them, they will kill you. So that's how I know that even though these things happened to me, I know that God was there, because if he wasn't, that man could have simply took me out in that shed, and he could have killed me with all them tools that was in that shed. And he could have killed me. He could have, even with his bare hands, I was little, you know, he could have killed me. And so that's how I know that God didn't allow me to die at the hands of him, of the rapist, you know, of this monster. And, you know, I never, you know, I don't blame God, you know, cause I know, you know, that God could have stopped it, but you know, I feel like this is part of my testimony. It was part of my strength. It was part of my making. It kept me humble, and, you know, and a lot of things could have came out past, you know, beyond this, but it didn't. You know, I could have, ended up like losing my life at an early age, been out there prostituting and all kind of stuff. That, you know, these things happen to people that, you know, get raped as a child. But that's the first part of my story, and it is a lot to go, and a lot that I have dealt with, and a lot that you know, that I had to take years to get over. I mean, being raped as much as I was is not something that you get over. Like some people tell you, oh, well, you know, just, okay, talk about it this one time and then you should be over it. That's either people that had something to do with it, knew they could protect you, or that just don't care. You know, they just don't care, because you can't tell somebody just to get over something like that. First of all, I was a person that has been raped like me. I was exposed to things that my mind wasn't ready for, you know, and I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't know how to cope with that. You know, I didn't have anybody to talk to, you know, I didn't have anybody to go to. And when your mind is not ready to cope with things like that, you use different things. You use substances. You use, you know, it comes out in anger. You fight. You try. And sometimes some people even take it out on other people, you know. And I know that, you know, my attitude was like, I couldn't love people the right way. I couldn't love people the right way because, you know, I wasn't loved the right way. So that's just the introduction of what I went through. But this is going to be a true story, the account of Tyshawn's life. So I hope that you all will keep me in your prayers, and, you know, pray for my strength, because I know a lot of people be on here and they be talking and stuff, but this stuff is not easy to talk about. But, you know, I hope that for some people that you watch your little kids, watch your little girls, love them enough to protect them, and don't let just people be around them, any and everybody. You know, it's not a good thing, because you might get over it, you might forget it, but that child is scarred for a lifetime. All right, see you next video.